Old man with a sack walks into a hotel claiming ownership. They laughed until they were sacked. Houston was a city built on oil, glass towers, and men who didn't wait their turn. The Royal Meridian Hotel stood at its heart. 5 stars, 30 stories, and one rule: appearances were everything. In the lobby, the scent of leather and imported orchids floated in air-conditioned silence. Doormen wore pressed uniforms like military lieutenants. Behind the front desk, concierges moved with robotic grace, eyes sharp beneath warm smiles. Nobody noticed the rain until the doors began to turn. He didn't enter so much as interrupt. The revolving glass groaned slightly, then a figure stepped through, dragging time with him. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. An old man, soaked. His coat clung to him like damp paper. One boot scuffed, the other nearly soleless. He pulled behind him a burlap sack, tied with rough cord. It bumped across the pristine floor, leaving a trail of water behind. No one spoke at first. Not because of who he was, but because he didn't belong. Not here. Not now. A man in $1,000 suit stepped aside instinctively, muttering under his breath. A child asked her mother if he was a ghost. The pianist paused, hands hovering over the keys. The old man didn't flinch. His steps were deliberate, straight to the front desk. The concierge spotted him and forced a customer service smile. That cracked the quiet. "Sir," he said carefully, "you might be looking for the bus terminal." The old man didn't answer. He dropped the sack by his side. Mud flecked off the bottom. "I own this hotel," he said. His voice was rough, slow, like wind over gravel. The silence returned, but this time it was different. Tighter. The concierge blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. "I'm sorry. I built it," the old man said. "Before they put their names on it." The concierge smirked. A few of the junior staff turned to look, half amused, half annoyed. One of them whispered, "Here we go." "You built the Royal Meridian?" the concierge asked. The old man nodded once. "And I've come back for it." This time, the laughter came loud and clear. A sarcastic chuckle from the assistant manager. The concierge looked around like he needed an audience for the moment. "Sir," he said, leaning slightly forward, "this hotel is owned by Meridian Holdings. It's part of a global chain. Maybe you wandered in by mistake. Security can help you find your way." He glanced over at the suited man by the entrance, who began moving toward them. Still, the old man didn't blink, didn't raise his voice. He reached into his coat, pulling out a single envelope. It was thick, yellowed, and sealed with a wax stamp bearing an unfamiliar crest. He set it gently on the marble desk. "Give that to your general manager," he said. "Tell him, the Langstons don't stay buried." Then he turned, sack in hand, and made his way to the side of the lobby. Nobody stopped him. No one helped him either. He sat slowly on a wooden bench, wiping rain from his brow with a handkerchief older than most of the staff. He rested the sack on his knees, both hands gripping the top like he was holding a treasure or a secret. The concierge stared at the envelope for a moment. There was something unnerving about the man's calm. He tapped the counter, then turned to a passing bellboy. "Get this upstairs," he said, "and tell Mr. Kinley it's from a Mr. Langston." The boy nodded, taking the envelope. As he hurried off, the concierge looked back at the bench. The old man hadn't moved. A few guests continued to whisper. One took out their phone to snap a picture. Another laughed softly, shaking her head. But the camera lingers. On the sack. On the man's hands. On the faint etching of initials inside his wedding ring. And in his eyes, blue, glassy, ancient, something burns beneath the weariness. Not confusion. Not madness. Something sharper. Like memory. Like fire waiting on air. The sack sat on the old man's lap like it weighed 100 pounds. Not in mass, but in meaning. Frayed at the edges and patched in 3 places, it looked like something pulled out of a mine shaft or a memory. Its canvas was stained with age and something darker near the base. The old man kept his hands resting gently on it, as if it might slip away if he didn't hold tight. Across the lobby, guests went back to pretending they weren't staring. They glanced, whispered, then averted their eyes as though proximity might damage their reputation. The pianist resumed his tune, though slower this time, as if the music itself had grown cautious. A hotel supervisor passed by, nodded toward the front desk, then frowned when he saw the old man still seated in the lounge. He walked over. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask." "Don't," the old man said softly, without looking up. The supervisor froze. The tone wasn't rude, just final. It was the kind of tone people obeyed without knowing why. "You're not security," the old man added. "And you're not paid enough to remove a man who's about to change everything you think you know about this place." The supervisor blinked, unsure whether to laugh or call backup. But before he could decide, his earpiece crackled. "Hold off," said a voice. "Mr. Kinley wants a minute." Upstairs, behind tinted glass on the 30th floor, General Manager Lewis Kinley stood holding the envelope. His fingers traced the wax seal. The Langston family crest, a hawk over a split mountain, was one he'd only ever seen in company archives. Ancient files, pre-acquisition records, a name buried before he was born. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. Elegant. He read it once. Then again. And then he sat down slowly. Downstairs, the old man unfastened the rope around the sack. Not all the way. Just enough to reach inside. From it, he pulled a faded photograph, its corners curled and yellow. A black and white image of a construction site. Dirt, scaffolding, steel beams. 5 men stood in front, all in hard hats. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same sharp eyes as the old man now, stood front and center. He set the photo on the bench beside him. Then came a rolled-up blueprint, its edges cracked from decades of folding. It bore the original name of the building etched in ink, Langston Tower, EST 1963. He gently unrolled it across his lap. Lines, calculations, notes written in faded pencil. Foundation measurements that didn't match the current layout of the hotel. Annotations that no current manager would recognize. The concierge watched from behind the desk, confusion now overtaking amusement. Something about the way the old man handled those items, carefully, reverently, struck a strange chord in the air. Even the other staff began to grow uneasy. Who walks into a 5-star hotel, soaking wet, dragging a sack full of documents like relics from another century? Who sits calmly while a dozen people mock him and never once raises his voice? The answer hung unspoken. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything. Mr. Kinley finally descended. He was a man who commanded rooms with his presence, but as he crossed the lobby, his steps were slower than usual. He adjusted his cufflinks, smoothed his tie. He was thinking hard. The old man didn't rise when Kinley approached. He didn't even lift his eyes. "You're Langston's son," Kinley said quietly. "The last one." The old man gave a slight nod. "Caleb Langston." Kinley lowered himself into the chair beside him. "We thought you were dead." "I was," the old man said. "To your board, anyway." Caleb didn't look at him. His attention stayed fixed on the blueprint. One finger tapped slowly on a small circle marked in the bottom corner of the page, "Original Vault Access." Kinley followed the finger. His expression shifted. "That room doesn't exist anymore," he said. "We repurposed the space in 2004. "No," Caleb replied. "You covered it." Kinley exhaled. "What is it you're looking for, Mr. Langston? An apology? Recognition? The company bought this property fair and square." "No, it didn't." Kinley paused. Caleb looked up at him now, eyes steady. "My father sold rights to the upper levels. But the foundation, the land beneath it, was never part of the deal. It's on a different deed. One that never transferred to Meridian Holdings." Kinley blinked. "That's not possible." Caleb reached into the sack again. This time, he pulled out a thin, weatherproof file. Inside it, layered in protective sleeves, were copies of documents. The original property deed, notarized. A land lease agreement signed, but never concluded. And a clause written in ink that had barely faded. In the event the Langston family shall return, ownership of the base property reverts unless compensation is rendered in full within 60 years. 60 years. It had been 59. "I don't need the building," Caleb said. "But I do own the ground it stands on." Kinley said nothing. He just stared at the file, as if willing it to vanish. Around them, the air seemed to shift. The concierge noticed first the sudden straightness of Kinley's posture, the way Caleb had taken control of the conversation without raising his voice. Guests were still milling around, unaware that the man they had laughed at might be holding the deed to everything above their heads. Kinley stood slowly. "I'll need to speak with corporate." "You have until midnight," Caleb said. "After that, I bring in my attorneys. And your guests will have to check out of a hotel they no longer have permission to operate." Kinley didn't respond. He turned and walked briskly back toward the elevators, phone already in hand. The old man watched him go. Then he reached down, gently closed the sack, and leaned back. The pianist had stopped playing again. Only now, No one was laughing. The elevator doors slid shut behind Lewis Kinley. 30 floors up, the city sprawled beneath tinted glass. Rain swept over the skyline, but inside the executive office of the Royal Meridian, silence pressed tighter than the weather outside. Kinley stood by the window, eyes fixed on the streets below, while a call rang out on speaker. "Legal," came the voice on the other end. "This is Morgan." "I need a title trace," Kinley said. "Langston Foundation Holdings. Houston, 1963 to present." There was a pause. "Did you say Langston?" Kinley pinched the bridge of his nose. "Yes. Get me everything you can. Fast. There's a man in my lobby claiming to own the land under this hotel." Another pause. Then, "Sir, if he's telling the truth, we may be in violation of occupancy law. I'll get back to you." The line went dead. Kinley exhaled slowly. Beneath his calm exterior, gears were spinning fast. The Langston name was more than folklore. It was buried history. Buried on purpose. When Meridian acquired the hotel in the 90s, they'd moved quickly to erase the old family's trace. The blueprints had been redrawn. The vault beneath the original foundation was sealed again, then forgotten. Until now. Downstairs, Caleb Langston stood slowly from the bench. The sack was back over his shoulder, and the blueprint tightly rolled under his arm. He didn't ask permission. He moved toward the eastern wing of the lobby, the part tourists never noticed. It led to a restricted hallway, behind velvet ropes and polished mahogany. A place for staff only, but built long before that designation meant anything. The concierge started toward him, hesitated, then stopped. Caleb walked like someone who'd made this journey before. He passed portraits of former general managers, now irrelevant. Past a locked display case of hotel memorabilia, old menus, press clippings, a silver key from the opening ceremony. He paused, just briefly, in front of it. Behind the glass was a photo. 5 men in hard hats. One of them was his father. He kept walking. At the end of the corridor stood a door with no label. Modern employees thought it led to storage. Even Kinley probably didn't know what was behind it anymore. But Caleb did. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a rusted key, long and thin, notched like something from a shipyard. He slipped it into the lock. Turned. The door creaked open. Stale air drifted out like breath from a forgotten tomb. He stepped inside. It was cold, even colder than the lobby. A narrow stairwell spiraled downward, carved in stone that didn't match the hotel's elegant upper levels. These weren't renovations. This was original architecture. Beneath the marble and chandeliers was something older, more brutal and real. He descended. Each step echoed like footsteps through time. The light bulbs above flickered to life one by one, strung by wires installed decades ago and never replaced. Pipes groaned above. Water dripped from a leak unseen. At the bottom, a steel door, the kind used in old banks. Round. Bolted. On the floor beside it, faint letters still visible in worn paint. Langston Reserve. He knelt beside the frame, brushing away dust, revealing a panel hidden under a slab of metal bolted to the wall. With effort, he pried it off. Inside was a mechanical lever system manual, not electronic. He reached into the sack again and pulled out a crank handle. Fitting it into place, he turned. Once. Twice. A deep rumble answered him, then a loud clunk. The vault unlocked. Inside was not gold, not stacks of cash. Caleb wasn't here for money. The vault was full of time. Wooden crates stacked to the ceiling, each marked in careful handwriting. Ledgers, contracts, family journals, maps, photos, hand tools, artifacts from a forgotten dynasty, buried not by war, but by acquisition. He stepped in, setting the sack down carefully. He opened a crate near the front. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound book. He wiped the dust away. The spine read, Langston Foundation Report, 1962. He opened it, flipping through pages of land surveys, engineer notes, receipts. There, in the margins, was a signature, William H. Langston, his father. But then something else caught his eye. Taped to the inside cover was a smaller envelope. It bore his name, in handwriting he hadn't seen since he was a boy. Caleb. Hands trembling slightly now, he opened it. Inside, a single page. Son, if you're reading this, then you came back. You always said they'd forget us. That they'd erase what we built. Maybe they did. But you found the truth. And the truth can't stay buried forever. What we built under this city isn't just concrete, it's legacy. And one day, it'll be yours again. Just promise me something. When they try to buy you off, remember who you are. Not a man with a hotel. A man with a name. Dad Caleb folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest. The silence of the vault wrapped around him. But it no longer felt empty. It felt like home. Upstairs, Kinley stood at the elevator, checking his phone. Legal hadn't responded. The concierge approached nervously. Sir, he went into the east corridor. Kinley glanced toward it, jaw tightening. Send security. But as the words left his mouth, his phone buzzed. A message. From Corporate Legal. Subject, Title Trace Findings. Kinley opened it. As he read, his hands went cold. Finding, Langston deed on foundational land is valid. Meridian's occupancy may be in breach. Immediate action recommended. He looked up. The old man wasn't just a problem anymore. He was the owner. The vault door shut behind Caleb Langston with a soft metallic thud. Above ground, the storm rolled harder. Thunder echoed across the skyline, like the city itself bracing for what was coming. Caleb emerged into the east corridor, blueprints in one hand, the leather-bound journal in the other. He walked with quiet purpose, water trailing from the hem of his coat. Security had arrived, 2 suited guards flanking the hallway. One stepped forward. Sir, we need to escort you to the lobby. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You're welcome to try. The younger guard hesitated. There was something in Caleb's gaze, not defiance, not arrogance. Authority. The kind that doesn't come from wealth, but from time, from truth, from blood and stone. Kinley appeared behind them. His expression had changed. Gone was the corporate polish, the confident smirk. In its place, uncertainty, caution. You really went down there, he said. Caleb nodded. And Caleb held up the book. My father wrote this the year he died. The vault holds documents that prove Langston Holdings never transferred ownership of the land. Your lease is invalid. Your foundation is built on someone else's memory. Kinley stiffened. This changes nothing overnight. Caleb stepped closer. It changes everything right now. You're squatting. Your permits are null. If I call the city, they'll shut you down by morning. You wouldn't dare. I don't bluff, Caleb said evenly. For a moment, silence fell like a blade between them. Then Caleb extended the book. Read it. Every word. This isn't about revenge or spectacle. This is about restoration. My family was erased. My father gave everything to this place. And in return, they called him obsolete. Just like you tried to do to me. Kinley took the journal, flipping through the aged pages. Contracts. Original blueprints. Land agreements signed in ink that hadn't yet faded with time. It was all there. You've made your point, Kinley muttered. No, Caleb said, voice rising just slightly. I've claimed my birthright. Behind them, the concierge stepped forward. Sir. Guests are beginning to talk. Some saw the vault door open. And staff are asking questions. Kinley looked pale. Caleb turned to him one last time. You'll make an announcement, he said. Not about me. About the truth. That the Langston name is part of this foundation. And that from this day forward, it's no longer buried. And if I don't? Kinley asked. Caleb smiled faintly. Then your guests won't be checking out of a hotel. They'll be evacuating one. With that, Caleb turned and walked toward the lobby. And for the first time since stepping through those revolving doors, the staff didn't laugh. They watched. In silence. The Royal Meridian lobby was abuzz. Whispers rippled like static through the marble hall. Guests clutched cocktails a little tighter. A jazz trio played faintly in the background, but even they could sense the tension. The rhythm slowed, uncertain. Caleb Langston stood near the center of it all, sack still slung across his shoulder. But now, people weren't sneering. They were watching. Across the room, Kinley adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his tie, and stepped onto the small platform used for holiday speeches and investor toasts. He didn't like crowds when they weren't clapping, and this one wasn't. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying through hidden speakers. If I could have your attention for a moment. The hum of conversation dulled. He glanced at Caleb, then back to the audience. This hotel has stood for nearly 3 decades as a symbol of hospitality, progress, and prestige. But today, we were reminded of something far older than any of that. Legacy. He cleared his throat. There are truths that time tries to cover, but some names survive beneath the stone and steel. One of those names is Langston. Gasps. Caleb didn't flinch. Kinley continued, earlier today, Mr. Caleb Langston revealed proof that the very foundation of this hotel, the land it was built upon, belonged to the Langston family for over half a century. and, more importantly, that ownership was never lawfully transferred. Now the crowd murmured. Phones came out. Some guests began recording. Kinley's hands gripped the edges of the podium. While legal proceedings are underway to verify all claims, I would like to personally acknowledge the Langston legacy. This hotel, effective immediately, will recognize the Langston family as co-founders and historic landholders of this site. He paused, the next words hard to swallow. And in light of these revelations, I will be stepping down as interim director, pending board approval. Silence. Then a few claps. Scattered. Unsure. Until a woman at the bar stood and applauded firmly, a regular guest, well known among the staff. Then another joined. And another. Soon, the lobby echoed with applause. Not for Kinley. For the man in the threadbare coat, holding a sack filled with history. Caleb didn't smile. He simply turned and walked out onto the front steps of the hotel. The rain had stopped. The storm had passed. Reporters were already outside. One shoved a mic toward him. Mr. Langston, what will you do now? He looked out across the city skyline. First, he said quietly, I'm going to breathe. Another question was shouted. Are you taking over the hotel? Caleb paused. No, he said. I'm taking back the truth. What they build next, that's up to them. Then he walked down the steps and disappeared into the crowd. But the name Langston? It no longer belonged to the past. It had returned. Caleb Langston stood before a building he'd once called home. Not the hotel, not the marble and glass facade. The foundation beneath it, the one that had shaped his family's history, stood like a living memory under his feet. And though the land had been buried beneath layers of luxury and expansion, the truth had resurfaced. The press had long since dispersed, their flashbulbs no longer stinging his eyes. The quiet had returned. Yet, Caleb wasn't ready to leave just yet. The hotel, while a symbol of his family's lost legacy, was no longer a place of personal significance. His return wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about reclaiming what had once been taken. It was about something simpler. Restoring his father's honor. He walked through the front doors of the Royal Meridian once more. This time, the staff recognized him not as a vagrant or a nobody, but as the rightful heir to the land they stood on. The concierge, who had once greeted him with mockery, now offered a deferential nod. His gaze was apologetic, but Caleb didn't look back at him. Up ahead, Kinley was in the middle of a conversation with board members. He caught Caleb's eye as he entered the grand lobby. Langston, Kinley said, his voice a mix of respect and restraint. We've made arrangements for a formal sit-down. The board is ready to discuss what happens next. Caleb didn't immediately respond. He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Are you in charge now? Kinley asked, the question heavy with implication. Caleb's eyes narrowed, but his voice was calm, measured. I've never been in charge. My family built this place. But what happens now is up to you. He let that hang in the air, just long enough for the weight of the words to sink in. Kinley blinked, then nodded. We're prepared to offer compensation for the oversight. Of course, we'll need to iron out the details. Caleb turned toward the elevator, his body rigid, but his mind clear. It's not about money, he said, voice firm but soft. It's about history. The elevator door slid open. Inside, Caleb's reflection stared back at him. He didn't see the old man anymore. He saw the man who would take the Langston name and restore it. Not for power, but for truth. He didn't need to be part of the hotel's daily operations. What mattered was this. The Langston family would no longer be forgotten. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, Caleb exited and walked toward the windows. The skyline stretched before him, and for the first time since he'd entered the hotel weeks ago, he felt at peace. No longer a stranger in the city. The storm had passed. The land that had been hidden beneath concrete and glass would rise again, but this time, not for the greedy hands of businessmen. It would be reclaimed for the Langston legacy, the land that had been lost to the whims of men who thought they could erase history. The board meeting began. The room was filled with tension, but it wasn't the kind of tension that comes from confrontation. This was the kind of tension that arises when something true and heavy is in the room. Caleb Langston sat at the table, not as a guest, but as a figure who had finally come home. And he wasn't leaving. The boardroom was filled with the quiet hum of murmured discussions, the rustling of paper, and the tapping of pens against glass surfaces. Kinley sat at the head of the table, flanked by directors, lawyers, and consultants, all of them watching the man who now held the key to their futures. Caleb Langston was no longer the outsider. He was the force that had shifted the course of history. The land beneath the hotel, once thought lost to time, had found its rightful heir. And Caleb wasn't here to negotiate a deal. He was here to settle something far more important, the return of a legacy. Mr. Langston, Kinley began, his voice respectful but cautious. We've reviewed the documents you provided. The city has been informed, and legal action is being prepared. We understand that ownership of this property is now in dispute. Caleb nodded, his gaze unwavering. It's not a dispute, he said simply. It's the truth. A tense silence fell. Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably, while others exchanged nervous glances. No one had expected Caleb to be so calm, so sure of himself. But Caleb Langston was no longer the son of a forgotten family. He was a man who had reclaimed his place in history. You built something remarkable here, Caleb continued, his voice carrying the weight of years. But this hotel is just a building. What matters is the legacy that gave it life. The Langston family's contribution to this city, to this land, is a story worth telling. Kinley shifted in his seat, trying to mask his unease. And how do you propose we move forward? Are you looking for a financial settlement? No, Caleb replied, his voice steady. I'm not interested in money. I want this hotel's history to be told the right way. I want my family's name restored to its rightful place. The room fell still. Even the most seasoned members of the board couldn't shake the gravity of his words. Caleb's request wasn't for revenge. It wasn't for recognition. It was for honor. A piece of the past that had been stolen, and now, in this very room, was being returned. Mr. Langston, one of the directors spoke up hesitantly. Are you suggesting we change the name? The branding? The entire legacy of this hotel? Caleb's gaze softened, but his resolve didn't waver. No. I'm not asking for a name change. The Royal Meridian will stand, but it will stand as a symbol of something greater, a place that recognizes the truth of its origins. Kinley leaned forward, his voice quiet. And what if we disagree? Caleb's expression was unwavering. Then I'll ensure the world knows who built this place, who owned it first. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Caleb's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. And then, slowly, one by one, the board members looked at each other, their expressions softening. Kinley nodded reluctantly. We'll do what's right. Caleb stood, his presence filling the room. That's all I ask. History can't be erased. It can't be bought or sold. It can only be remembered. With that, he turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Outside the building, the city was alive with the pulse of a new day. Caleb Langston looked out over the skyline, his reflection merging with the rising sun. His family's name had been restored to its rightful place, and the truth had finally emerged from the shadows. The Royal Meridian was more than a hotel now. It was a symbol of legacy, of history, and of a man who refused to let the past be buried. Caleb Langston had returned, not as a victim of time, but as its keeper. And in doing so, he had ensured that the past would never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think about Caleb Langston's incredible journey and how he reclaimed his family's legacy. Was Kinley's reaction justified? How did you feel about Caleb's powerful return to the Royal Meridian? Share your thoughts below, and remember, your support helps us bring more stories to life. Stay tuned for the next chapter in our collection of unforgettable tales.